Good morning. Welcome to another live stream Sunday service. Great to be able to be here with you. Great to be able to have my wife on board today to be able to help me give some perspective. Today we're talking about endings, and this is our third lesson on Solomon. So we talked about one of Solomon's highs and when he dedicated the temple and the prayer that went along with it. We talked about his beginnings in another sermon. And now we're talking about the endings. And so if you're joining us, those other two sermons will give some insight into this. But either way, we're recapping it. You really won't miss a beat. For more information, just refer to the other two. But before we begin that, since we are talking about endings, and in our American culture, especially our American cinema culture, there is definitely a trend that we have, a culture that we have, and that is we like happy endings. And here on the screen, I am displaying Brenda's favorite movie channel. And I'm going to let Brenda explain why she likes this channel so much.
Yeah, I do. I really do like this channel. I think, I know the movies are, they're cheesy, they're predictable, the acting isn't always very good. They have the same storyline, pretty much. But I think I'm drawn to them because it is, they have happy endings. They always make it at the end. I think it's funny. There's usually some sort of coffee shop or bakery. But I think it's just sometimes it is you just want to see them make it and you want to see happy endings. And sometimes even get away from the stress of the world a little bit. So it is a place that I go to sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not going to go as far as to make the Hallmark channel my favorite movie channel, but I do get the sense of wanting happy endings. I sort of expect it, whether it's someone getting justice, someone overcoming at the very end, things falling into place for the person you want to fall into place. This is a very natural thing, something that we do like in American culture. And therefore, I think this is something that for us, we just have to make sure that we watch ourselves, because not all the Bible has a happy ending. Sometimes the Bible is more like a foreign film that has that tragic ending that you're wondering, how on earth did it end that way? And why do I feel so unsatisfied? So we're talking about Solomon today, and Solomon did not have that happy ending. We're going to look at that. He's a renowned king. We wish he had the happy ending, but he didn't. And so let's recap a little bit about Solomon and his beginnings, really. Now, Solomon may have not had the ideal beginnings when it came to how his parents came together, but the Bible said that God loved him anyway. From the very beginning. And when Solomon needed God, and because he had become king and didn't know how he was going to rule, and he felt incapable, he came to God with sacrifices and offerings, and God appeared to him, and Solomon requested the right thing for a learning, obedient, humble, discerning heart. And sure enough, God not just granted him that, but God granted him much more. And we then see Solomon start flourishing. Really, we see Solomon take off. He starts doing these projects, the most important of which was the temple, something that took him 7 years to build, that really united the nation. I mean, it was such an expensive project that would be so hard for us to be able to accomplish these days. But it brought all the people, the nation of Israel, together, which during 2020, our political season, we know how hard that is. But he managed to bring everybody together, and everybody focused on God, and everybody praying towards God in a very good spiritual place. So we see Solomon flourishing here, even in his rulings, the way that he would rule and expand the borders. And so the things that God had put into Solomon's character, you really see flourishing here. So God appears to him a second time and reminds him that as long as you stay the course and you stay faithful to me and your kids stay faithful to me, then all of this will continue. Well, sadly, that is not the way that things would end. And we see examples in the Bible that show us that Solomon was headed towards a bad path. And eventually what we read in chapter 11 would really highlight everything and put everything into perspective. So for that, we're going to go to the book of First Kings, chapter 10. We're not going to read. I'm just going to summarize some things that Solomon did. He had accumulated some things. And it said he had accumulated 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen. That Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt. So, a lot of people, what they would do is they would read into this and they would say, well, wow, God must be clearly blessing him. And it also says that the weight of gold that came to Solomon annually was 25 tons. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedar as abundant and sycamore in the Judean footholds. So once again, a lot of churches would look at this and say, look at the way that God was with Solomon, that he was enriching him. God is on your side. And we see that aspect where we think all these are blessings. But if you look in the book of Deuteronomy, where this was written much before, even before Israel was a nation, and before they crossed the Jordan, where God is telling them something about their king, and he's telling them something that the king must not do. And in Deuteronomy chapter 17, beginning in verse 16, the Bible reads, "However, he must not acquire many horses for himself, or send the people back to Egypt to acquire many horses. For the Lord has told you, you are never to go back that way again. He must not acquire many wives for himself, so that his heart won't go astray. And he must not acquire very large amounts of silver and gold for himself." And so we read just right now, or before this, not read, but we went over, well, Solomon had acquired many horses, and he got them from Egypt, and he acquired a lot of gold, and he acquired a lot of silver. And this was the very things that he was not supposed to do. And so this already starts letting us know that there were things that were going wrong here. What we end up reading in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 is where the part where he accumulates many wives and God's reaction to overall what Solomon had been doing as of late. So let's go to 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1. And the Bible reads, "King Solomon loved many foreign women in addition to Pharaoh's daughter, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women from the nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, and they must not intermarry with you, because they will turn your heart away to follow their gods." To these women Solomon was deeply attached in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses, and 300 who were concubines, and they turned his heart away. When Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away to follow other gods. He was not wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord his God, as his father David had been. Solomon followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the born idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight, and unlike his father David, he did not remain loyal to the Lord. At that time, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the aberrant idol of Moab, and Milcom, the aberrant idol of the Ammonites, on the hill across from Jerusalem. He did the same for all his foreign wives who were burning incense and offering sacrifices to their gods. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had commanded him about this so that he would not follow other gods, but Solomon did not do what the Lord had commanded. Then the Lord said to Solomon, "Since you have done this and did not keep my covenant and my statutes, which I commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. However, I will not do it during your lifetime for the sake of your father David. I will tear it out of your son's hand. Yet I will not tear the entire kingdom away from him. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem that I chose." All right, well, I mean, this is kind of like the last straw is when he decides to acquire many wives for himself. And, on a side note, I mean, it takes a lifetime, right, to be able to, be a good husband and kind of learn the ropes. 700 wives, come on. Look, I'm not trying to judge the guy, but I think a lot of us men are like, yeah, we're nodding our heads. It's Solomon now stands as a man condemned. And the Bible, it doesn't even record his response to this. Isn't that a little curious that he's strangely silent when it comes to all of this? His sin would cause a tear between God's people, the very people he united in building the temple that everyone prayed towards. Because of this sin, it would actually end up to their division. The very wisdom he received from God when he appeared to him, he used for himself. He became wise in his own eyes, and then these wives that were made in part because he loved women, and also in part because he was trying to establish peace treaties, probably with other nations, ended up leading him away. So much so that he started offering sacrifices to other gods and built altars to gods that were dedicated for child sacrifice. I mean, how far off did Solomon get from being the wisest of all time, to foolish right here? And we're not judging him. This is just what the Bible says. Uh, he didn't handle the blessings the right way. He glorified himself and kind of went downhill from there. And so the Lord was angry. It even says that he had appeared to him twice. And now Solomon, because of this, you start seeing his enemies grow. You start seeing him have problems on each side, and of course, the future of the nation was now in danger. And so, how do we avoid this, right? Because we go from one extreme to another on this, one side of the spectrum to the other. Well, we got some basic points we want to talk about, and it'll just help us out. And the first one is we got to stay humble. We have to stay humble. All right, so here we have a picture of my rabbit, and this is the second time this rabbit has made it into a sermon. I have issues with this rabbit. This rabbit lived in just like this little square area before we decided to purchase him. And we brought him into a home where he was able to go to the backyard and frolic around, be able to eat freely from all sorts of different vegetation. He was inside the house with air conditioning. Look at him right there. He's living the grand life. And yet this rabbit has bit me a couple of times. See, that kind of bothers me a little bit. When he bites me, it's like, oh, you ungrateful rabbit. But, we've all felt like that towards somebody or something. But we don't realize at times that if we're not careful, that's how God could end up with us when we're not staying humble. Solomon, you look at Solomon forgot how he had approached God, that he was feeling like a child, that he needed help, he needed offerings to God, and God delivered. He forgot how God's attitude was towards him, that God loved him from the beginning, and that when he needed God, God appeared to him twice and gave him everything he needed. And Solomon somehow forgot who enabled him to be what he was, that God gave him the victories because of the character that he had. Those early victories, the projects and everything, he would have never been able to accomplish them unless God had given him that wisdom, that the character that God gave him was bringing him blessings. But instead he had a hard time with those blessings. He had a hard time not using it on himself, and unfortunately he stopped having that need for God, and even started to the point of starting offering to other gods. Kind of sad.
Yeah, I think we look at Solomon's story and you root for him. You see how far God has taken him, how much God has invested in him. And it's a good story for us to learn from. And like Aaron said, staying humble is like the biggest thing. Is he forgot even how and why he approached God. I believe he approached God because he knew God was the source of where he was going to get his help. He says, he felt like a child. He knew he couldn't do it by himself. He knew he needed God's help to do this. And so often in our lives, I think we approach God in the same way. When we're first looking for a relationship with God, we're willing to offer those sacrifices like he did. We're willing to do anything to be able to have that relationship with God. When we find ourselves in situations that we are out of our control, whether it's in our marriage or health, life just happens, and we turn to God because deep down we know that is where we need to go. That's who's going to help us. And yet when life gets better and more comfortable, like it did for Solomon, we forget. And we don't have the same kind of demeanor and the same posture and the same humility. We become independent, we become self-reliant, and we become proud, and we kind of think we've done this on our own, that our life successes or the good things that have happened have been because we've done them, and yet they didn't come from there. All of them came from God. We want blessings from God. We ask God for blessings. We ask God for favors. We ask things. And then the very things that God gives us, we use for ourselves instead of honoring God with those blessings, instead of glorifying God with those blessings. And the blessings that we get, we start, using for ourselves. We no longer want to have God be the whole pie in our lives. We just want to give him a small portion. And I think we end up a lot like Solomon when we don't focus in on our humility. And it takes effort to do that. Solomon got overly confident. And I think even forgot that a lot of that character wasn't something perhaps he was born with. God invested a lot in him, gave him wisdom, gave him those things, even put people around him to teach him and build him up. And so he was successful again because of what God had done. and yet he started using it for himself. The Proverbs, we've all heard the Proverbs, so many of those, and that all came from God. And so it's a good lesson to us of how God can set us up just like Solomon and give us everything we need and have this plan for us. But when we lose our humility, when we lose why we started off wanting to sacrifice and give ourselves to God, when we lose that, we're in jeopardy of ending up a lot like Solomon and losing everything at the end, because we've just forgot our humility.
Yeah, it's really staying with that whole mentality of God made me. If you manage to be able to keep that as a part of your character, we become Christians, and then we're reading our Bible. We have people in our lives. Our character is being enhanced. Our wisdom is being enhanced. Our discipline. So many things are actually going on that God is investing in us. And then later on, perhaps we're successful or something happens, and we forget. We don't have the same disposition that we had before, where we would keep ourselves on the altar. And yet when God gave us these things, if you look in Luke chapter 12, there's actually a very specific way or attitude that God says he gives us these things. And he says in Luke 12:31, he says, "But seek his kingdom, and these things will be provided for you. Don't be afraid, little flock, because your Father delights to give you the kingdom." So everything that we have, it's not that God was giving in a way where, with an ugly attitude, he was delighted to be able to give us these things. But it's all about how humble we stay. God made me. God's the one that did this. I'm not going to try to glorify myself, because sometimes that's what happens is we get everything we want and we start glorifying ourselves a little bit too much. And God knows when we're glorifying ourselves, even though he made us. And we're not talking about he made us in the sense of like he made us just human. We're talking about the character that God has given us. And then after a while, there's a fine line of like, is God being glorified, or is now my life about glorifying me? Whether it's the bigger house, whether it's trying to show something, or whatever it may be. But it's making sure that it is God that is being glorified, because that's actually what happened to Solomon and why things didn't go as good as they really should at the end. We see this with our kids in sports or academics. Sometimes it's not about them, it's about glorifying us. There's a lot of different ways. Even the ministry could be the same thing. Let me just say this. Anything could be corrupted. Anything that God has given us could be corrupted if we don't stay humble. The second point is don't compromise convictions. All right, so here I have a picture of a wedding ring. This is my wife's wedding ring, and she's actually wearing it right now. Look at that thing. Well, it wasn't the most expensive thing, but it was what I had at that time, right? I gave you my heart, which was worth more than diamonds. Anyway, but I remember when I had that wedding ring, I kept it in a closet, and I would go and check on it every day, multiple times a day, because I bought that in anticipation of one day giving it to her. As a matter of fact, I bought it a good 8 months before I actually gave it to her. And I would go and check on it and make sure it was still there. Now, I don't know if me saying that revealed something about me that's not good, but nevertheless, I use it as an example of how much I guarded that, how much every day I wanted to make sure that it was there, that it was safe, that it was good. And I think making sure that we don't compromise our convictions, that we guard our convictions that way. Solomon just didn't guard it. He shouldn't have married those women that he married. But it says that he loved them. He actually was attached to them from that way. But he should have never compromised. He should have never tried to form alliances in that way. He shouldn't have collected the things that he collected. He should have been content. He should have had that part that he had guarded everything that God had deposited and had a much more spiritual awareness about it. And I think if Solomon would have done these things, he wouldn't have compromised his convictions.
Yeah, I think Solomon, again, it's so sad. I think he let it go little by little. It started off compromising the little things, and I think it's easy to say, well, that's not that big of a deal. I did this, and that's not that big of a deal. But it started off with the small things, and it started off with losing gratitude. It started off with him he took his focus off of God. He forgot who he was, he forgot what God was for him. And it starts off with those small heart things, and it led him to places like Aaron mentioned earlier, sacrificing to this God that's, with child sacrifices. And so it's so important. And I think those things take being intentional. It takes us having a plan. All of us will fail. All of us have our weaknesses. But when something is really important to us, we have a plan. We make sure we take care of it. And so it starts off with even like guarding that relationship with God, the thing that was so important to us, the thing that we were willing to search and give, offerings such as Solomon did, is making sure we keep that and not compromise those relationships. That God is still the first relationship that is important to us, that nothing comes before that. I think we end up in scary places when we start to compartmentalize our life and we only want to give God access to certain things. Certain convictions, we kind of can get wishy-washy, and yet God is supposed to be the whole pie, not just a piece of that pie. Like I said, it takes being intentional, making a plan, reading, and then putting it into practice. It takes making sure that we make those efforts to put God first in our life and not other things, not the very blessings that God gives us, but God who gave the blessings. Even having spiritual relationships and forming those kinds of relationships that help we guard each other. I appreciate that so much about Aaron. I need that kind of reminder. I need that that knowing that someone's got my back, that he knows what my weaknesses are, that he'll remind me if I'm not being content, if I'm not trusting God, if I'm being whatever, and I appreciate that. And because I want to guard that relationship with God, because it's so easy to slip. It's so easy to start off with the small things and you end up in a place you didn't want to end up.
Yeah, we're not trying to be reactionary, obviously, about any of this. But what it is it's having just a consistent lifestyle where you're always aware that you don't want to compromise things. The relationships you choose, a lot of it really is just about how you don't want to compromise, and you want actually someone that does the opposite. Not someone that gets you to compromise, but someone that actually gets you to enhance the things that God has given you and your convictions. Hey, I want someone that helps my convictions grow stronger. And so my friendships, and it's very important to be able to do that. Modern culture, though, it's all about compromise in our modern culture. And unfortunately, it's really sad, especially when it comes to God, that people start compromising their convictions. They just for the sake of the world, or even sometimes as we get older, and we've been doing this for a long time, we even start compromising our dedication to things. A lot of Christian practices change over time because schedules change or society changes, but the convictions never change. And we always do what Jesus wants us to do and what Jesus wants to accomplish, not what the world does. But sometimes we have to take inventory of our lives and saying, am I offering more to the world than I'm offering to God? Is there a rival there? And if so, I shouldn't be compromising these kinds of convictions, because that is really what could lead us to a really detrimental place. So not compromising our convictions is really important. And I don't know about you, but it's not hard. It's not like I feel this is a burden. This is what I want. If I started like Solomon, right, and we all started that way, I want to stay that way. But I need the reminders for me not to compromise my convictions. And then the last thing, and more of a wrapping up point, is to stay focused. To stay focused. And with everything going on, I know staying focused sometimes in this lifestyle is like being at home when the kids are all at school and you're trying to accomplish things. Staying focused seems to be a pretty difficult thing for many of us, especially with some of our situations. And sometimes that is what's going to happen. But finding ways to make sure that we stay focused and putting practices and implementing practices is very important. The way that you align your schedule to keep you focused, the way that you have family devotionals to keep your family focused, the way that you make sure that you are in a small group of some sort and really participate in it to keep you focused. There are a lot of things that God asks us to do that we confuse them sometimes with requirements or check boxes, but reading our Bible and praying and all of these things, they're all about staying focused, because we see how Solomon began and we say, that's how I want it. And then now I have to protect it. And I do it by staying humble. I do it by not compromising, and I do it by staying focused. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. So hopefully this Sunday sermon helps a little bit. Hopefully it really causes to get realigned and say, hey, you know, at the end of the day, maybe Solomon did not have the American cinema ending, but I want it spiritually. I want that ending spiritually. So hopefully this helps a lot and sets us on the right path. So thank you very much for joining us this Sunday. Thank you, Brenda, for joining me this Sunday. Have a great Sunday, and love you, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Bye.